Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight we are traveling deep into the quiet backroads of Canada, into forgotten mining towns, frozen lake communities, and sleepy villages that hide secrets far darker than their postcard streets suggest. These are real accounts from people who were just trying to live ordinary lives, until something in their small town watched them, followed them, or decided they would never be allowed to feel safe again. As you listen, remember that these places are not faraway fantasies. They are the kinds of towns you might drive through on a weekend trip, without ever knowing what really happened there after dark. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. I was 18 when this happened, and it took place during what was supposed to be the best year my town had seen in a long time. Elmbridge was one of those tiny prairie communities in Alberta that people only remembered for gas, coffee, and the faded welcome sign leaning at an angle on the highway. The kind of place where everyone knew when you were born, what your parents did, and exactly how many times you skipped school. Nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen there, at least not out in the open. That was what everyone told themselves, right up until the year our graduation celebrations turned into a warning that still hangs over the town. Our school was small enough that the entire senior class could fit in a single photo without needing a ladder. The graduating class that year was 83 students. The town had been talking about it for months, excited that so many of us were actually finishing and planning to leave. Parents volunteered to repaint the gym. Local businesses donated food and decorations. The principal kept reminding us that this was our moment to shine, to show the rest of the province that kids from a nowhere town could make something of themselves. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, I kept noticing a man around town that I did not recognize. That alone was strange. Strangers did pass through, but everyone could tell the difference between a traveler and someone who seemed to linger with no reason. This man was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, and he had that oddly neat look some people have when they are trying a little too hard to appear casual. Short, dark hair that never seemed out of place, a plain jacket despite the cold, and a way of standing that made it obvious he was not simply waiting for someone. He watched. I first saw him outside the small grocery store on a Saturday afternoon. He leaned against a newspaper rack with his hands in his pockets, pretending to study the weathered posters in the window. Every time someone walked past, his eyes flicked up, sharp and quick. When a group of younger girls from the 10th grade left the store, his gaze followed them all the way down the sidewalk, long after any normal person would have looked away. It bothered me enough that I slowed down and watched him through the reflection in a parked truck's window, but nothing happened. Eventually he walked off, casual and unhurried, and I told myself I was overreacting. After that, I noticed him in more and more places. At the rink during a weekend hockey game, seated alone near the top row. At the gas station on a Wednesday night, standing inside the store but buying nothing. Once, I saw him across from the school, just outside the chain-link fence, pretending to be on his phone while his eyes swept the groups of kids leaving after class. I asked my mom if she knew who he was, figuring she might recognize a new worker from one of the farms, but she shook her head. In a town like ours, an unfamiliar adult was already unusual. An unfamiliar adult who seemed to spend a lot of time near the school was far worse. The day of graduation, the sky over Elmbridge was a pale, washed-out blue, as if even the weather could not decide if it wanted to celebrate or not. Our class stood outside the front doors of the school in our green and white gowns, caps in hand, families taking photos from every angle. I was laughing with my friends about how ridiculous we looked when I felt eyes on me. That attention is different from a casual glance. It has weight. I turned toward the street, and there he was, standing near the edge of the parking lot. He wore the same plain jacket, the same carefully neutral expression. For a moment, our eyes met. He looked at me like he recognized me, like we had shared some private joke, and then he started walking toward the group. My stomach tightened, and for no good reason I smoothed the front of my gown, suddenly feeling exposed. When he reached the edge of the crowd, he lifted a hand in a small wave. "Congratulations," he said, his voice low and oddly smooth. "You all must be proud." Up close, I noticed how still he held his body, like every movement was deliberate. His eyes were a little too bright, his smile a little too fixed. Thanks," I replied, forcing a polite nod. "In a small town, you're taught to be respectful to adults, even if they unsettle you. Do you have someone graduating?" He tilted his head for a second, as if the question amused him. "You could say that," he answered, then looked me over in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "Big night for you, Cooper." Hearing my name from his mouth felt like stepping onto thin ice. I had no idea who he was. My name was not printed anywhere on me, and the teachers had not read out the list yet. Before I could ask how he knew me, my friend James came up beside me and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Hey," James said quietly, eyeing the stranger. "We have to go line up. Come on." The man's smile shifted then, just a fraction, tightening at the corners. "Would not want to be late," he murmured. His gaze lingered on me for a beat too long, before he stepped back, nodded, and walked away toward the street. We joined the rest of our class, falling into alphabetical lines, but I could not shake the feeling of his eyes between my shoulder blades. As we shuffled toward the gym doors, James leaned closer. "Do you know that guy?" he asked under his breath. "No," I answered. "Do you?" "Kind of," he replied. "My cousin in Red Deer mentioned someone who got talked about online. Older guy who hangs around schools and events. People have reported him following kids outside malls, at bus stops, stuff like that." He swallowed, glancing back toward the parking lot. "The way you describe him, it sounds exactly like him." I felt my blood run cold. In a bigger city, you hear about people like that and imagine they stay there, drawn by crowds and anonymity. You do not picture them choosing a town where every car on the highway is noticed, where every unfamiliar face stands out. The idea that someone who had already been whispered about for hanging around kids would calmly attend. Our graduation felt unreal. Inside the gym, the ceremony began. Parents filled the bleachers. The band stumbled through the opening music. The principal launched into the usual speech about bright futures. On the surface, nothing was wrong. I tried to focus, clapping where everyone else clapped, smiling when my name was called. Each time I walked back to my seat, I let my eyes flick toward the back of the gym, half expecting to see him leaning against the wall. I did not. That almost unnerved me more. If he was not in the gym, where had he gone? After we threw our caps and the formal part of the night ended, the whole town spilled back outside into the parking lot for more pictures. The sun had dipped low enough that the light was soft and golden, the air cool. I stood with James and a few others near the side of the building, reliving small memories, when the mood around us shifted. Conversations faltered. People's heads turned in the same direction like a flock of birds sensing a storm. He was walking back toward the school. This time, he did not hang back at the edge of the lot. He walked straight up to a cluster of younger girls from the 11th grade who were standing alone near the curb. One of them, Kayla, laughed at something he said, but even from a distance you could see how tight her smile was, how her shoulders drew inward. James swore under his breath. "We are telling someone now," he said. "I am not just watching this." We left our group and headed toward the nearest uniform we could find. One of the town officers was standing near the flagpole, chatting with a teacher. When we reached him, my voice shook more than I liked, but I forced the words out. We explained about the man, how he had been around town for weeks, how he seemed to focus on the students, how he had known my name though we had never met. James added what his cousin had told him, that there were online posts about a man matching this description hanging around other schools. The officer's face changed as we spoke. The polite, detached expression slid away, replaced by a sharper, more alert focus. "Where is he now?" he asked. We pointed. The officer spoke briefly into his radio, then started walking toward the man with that particular kind of measured, calm, trained people use when they expect something might go wrong. Another officer we had not noticed near the doors joined him, splitting the distance so the man could not easily slip back to the street. From where we stood, we could not hear every word, but we saw the shifts in body language. The officer stepped in front of the man, blocking his path. The man's face tightened. His smile vanished, replaced by a flat, unreadable expression. One of the girls he had been speaking to backed away, clutching her bag against her chest. The second officer moved slightly behind him, just enough to turn a casual chat into something else. Within minutes, the casual pretense broke. They asked him for identification. He hesitated, then produced something from his pocket. The first officer studied it, said something that made the man's jaw clench. When the officer reached for his cuffs, the man's gaze snapped past him and locked on me across the parking lot. I have never forgotten that look. It was not confusion or surprise. It was anger, sharp and personal, as if I had ruined something he believed he was owed. The world around us felt suddenly too bright, the air too thin. For a second, it felt like there were only 3 people there. The man with that burning stare, the officer holding his arm, and me. They walked him past us toward the waiting cruiser. As they did, he twisted his head just enough to keep me in sight as long as possible. His mouth pulled into a slow, humorless smile, and under his breath, barely audible, his lips formed words that made my stomach knot. "This is not over." Maybe he meant nothing by it. Maybe it was just something he said to give himself a sense of power. But in that moment, with the metal of the handcuffs glinting in the fading light and the entire town watching from a few meters away, it felt like a threat that hung in the air long after the car door slammed and the cruiser pulled away. People tried to brush it off later. The adults said things like, "Well, thank goodness the right people were there, and he will not be back here again." The principal reassured parents that everything was under control. Life in Elmbridge slid back toward normal, at least on the surface. The next week, the grocery store looked the same. The gas station smelled like coffee and oil as always. The rink echoed with the shouts of kids. But those of us who had seen him up close started walking in pairs more often. Younger students stopped lingering alone outside after practice. If a car sat parked too long near the school, someone always noticed. The town liked to pretend that nothing truly bad ever happened there. But behind closed doors, people admitted what they did not say out loud at the time. A man like that does not just pick a small town at random. He comes because he knows people there will trust their neighbors more than their instincts, that they will hesitate to believe something is wrong if no one has officially said so. He comes because he believes no one will call him out. The only reason my last night of high school is not remembered for something much worse is because one time, in one tiny Canadian town, someone did. I was 16 when my school decided to pretend it was new. The building itself sat in the middle of a small town in rural Quebec, the kind of place where the houses leaned a little. The church bell rang too loud on Sundays, and people still gossiped in French over chipped mugs of coffee. The school had been there longer than almost anyone could remember. Rumor said it used to be a convent, then a hospital during the war, then a boarding school for girls. The province had poured money into it recently, so we got fresh paint, new lockers, polished floors, and a sleek glass entrance that did not match anything else in town. On the surface, everything looked modern, but there were parts of the building no amount of paint could fix. The main hallway lights hummed with that faint electric buzz that gets into your bones if you stand under it too long. The old intercom speakers were boxed in plastic, but they still crackled in the same tired way when the office made announcements. Some doors were shut and never opened. We were told that was because the rooms were being used for storage, but every kid knows storage is what adults say when they do not want to explain something. From the first day of that year, I hated being in the school after the final bell. During class, the noise and motion made it feel normal. Once most people left, a different weight settled into the halls, like the building itself was waiting for something. My friends laughed when I said that. They said I was just spooking myself because of the stories, but that was the problem. The stories were everywhere. People whispered that a girl had died there when it was a boarding school, locked out in winter by one of the sisters as punishment and never found until morning. Others said a patient from when it was a hospital had jumped from the third-floor window and left a stain on the floor that no cleaner could remove. Every grade had its own version. Details changed to make it feel like it happened not that long ago. The teachers waved it off as teenage imagination. Even when you do not believe a thing, though, hearing it enough times gets in your head. The first strange thing that happened to me was not dramatic. It was so small that if it had only happened once, I might never have thought about it again. It started with a note. My locker was in the far corner of the second floor, near the staircase that led up to a blocked-off landing. They had installed those new electronic locks at the main doors, and supposedly there were plans to do the same for some classrooms, but the lockers were old metal ones with vents shaped like crooked smiles. Every morning I checked mine before homeroom, more out of habit than anything else. Most days, it held the same things: textbooks, a spare hoodie, the crumpled remains of old math quizzes. One Tuesday, I opened it and found a folded piece of paper sitting neatly on top of my books. No name on it. Just a strip of lined paper folded once. I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching, but the hallway around me buzzed like usual. People slammed locker doors, called across the corridor, hurried toward class. I unfolded the note. "You look tired today. Do not stay after dark." For a second, I assumed it was a prank. The message was strange, but it could have been a joke from someone in my friend group who knew I did not like staying late. The handwriting was neat, almost too careful, each letter printed with the same pressure. There was nothing else. No name, no doodles, no hearts or curses. Just that one sentence. I shoved it in my pocket, planning to show my best friend at lunch and roll my eyes about it. By the time lunch came around, I had forgotten. High school days all blur into each other when you are trying to survive exams and gossip at the same time. The second note appeared 2 days later. This time, I found it at the end of the day when most people had already left. I stayed a few minutes late to talk to our French teacher about an assignment. By the time I finished, the hallway had emptied almost completely. The sound of my footsteps echoed louder than usual as I walked back to my locker. I twisted the dial, opened the door, and there it was. "You should not walk home alone." He likes the back stairs. The skin between my shoulder blades prickled. Again, no name. Same precise handwriting. I looked up and down the hall. Only one other student was in sight, a grade 9 boy hauling his backpack toward the exit. Far down the corridor, near the office, a teacher locked a classroom door. That was it. The back stairs were the ones I used every day. They were narrow, and the motion sensor lights at the bottom took a second too long to flick on, so you always stepped into darkness first. My route home took me past the old church, and then along a street with more trees than houses. I'd never thought of it as dangerous before. The town was small. Nothing that bad ever happened there, at least according to adults. I told myself the note was a dumb joke, trying too hard to be creepy. Maybe someone saw me using the back stairs and wanted to freak me out. I crumpled the paper, threw it in my bag instead of the trash, and left by the front doors that day. It felt ridiculous, but I did not want to test it. The third note did not feel like a joke at all. It showed up the following week, on a day when the sky turned the color of dirty snow and the wind shoved at the windows hard enough to make them rattle. The principal announced during homeroom that all after-school activities were canceled because a storm was coming. Buses would leave early. Anyone who usually walked was encouraged to go straight home. Nobody was happy about it, but the idea of leaving early made the day feel lighter. Sometime between second and third period, someone slipped another folded paper into my locker. I knew before I opened it that it would be for me. There was no reason. It was just a feeling, heavy and certain. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. You will hear him today. Do not answer when he calls your name. By then, the notes had stopped being something I could shrug off. There was a pattern. Whoever was writing them knew my routine. They knew I used the back stairs. They knew I sometimes stayed late. Now they were telling me I would hear him and warning me not to respond. The part that scared me most was not the threat. It was the assumption that this was inevitable, not you might or if you will. At lunch, I showed the notes to my friend Nadia. Her eyes widened as she read them. This is not funny, she said. Who is sending these to you? If I knew, I would tell them to stop, I answered. Do you recognize the handwriting? She shook her head. It looks old, like the way my grandmother writes addresses on envelopes. We spent the rest of lunch speculating. Maybe it was a bored teacher. Maybe it was some kid with too much time and a weird sense of humor. Maybe someone had seen a creeper in the stairwell and wanted to warn me anonymously. None of the possibilities fit perfectly, but they were better than the alternative, that something else was wrong with the building itself. The storm rolled in faster than expected. By the time final period started, snow scraped sideways across the windows, and the sky had turned so dark it looked more like late evening than afternoon. The wind howled around the corners of the school, a low, constant sound that made it hard to pay attention to the teacher. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the minute hand to move faster. When the dismissal bell finally rang, everyone rushed to leave. Teachers stood near doors, reminding us to go straight home. The intercom crackled as the office repeated the message for anyone who had not heard it the first 3 times. Nadia had a ride, so she grabbed her things in a hurry. Text me when you get home, she said, squeezing my arm. Maybe keep your headphones in until you are out of here, just in case. Just in case what? I asked, but she was already swept away by the current of students. I went to my locker. The hallway was already thinning out. Lockers slammed shut one after another, like a line of dominoes falling. The fluorescent lights flickered once, steadied, then buzzed louder. I swapped my books, pulled on my coat, and hesitated. The front doors would be more crowded, but closer to the buses. The back stairs would be emptier, but sheltered from the wind for longer. Every other day, I would have taken the back without thinking. That day, the memory of the note sat in my pocket like a stone. He likes the back stairs. I closed my locker and forced myself toward the front. It felt childish to alter my route because of anonymous paper. The hallway near the main entrance was packed with people shoving arms into sleeves, tugging hats, over ears, hunching against the cold that blasted in each time the doors opened. I hated crowds almost as much as I hated the eerie quiet of the building when it was empty. I decided to cut down the side corridor that led past the stairs, thinking I would slip into the flow closer to the doors. The side corridor was almost empty. Only the recessed doorway to the back stairs broke the blank stretch of wall. The little green emergency exit sign above it glowed faintly. The motion light at the bottom flicked on as someone pushed the door open from below. I stopped. For a second, all I could see was the shape of a person on the landing, half in shadow. The angle of the light made it impossible to see a face clearly. Then the shape stepped forward, just enough that the overhead light caught their shoulders. It was a man, taller than any of the boys in my grade, wearing an old-fashioned dark coat that looked too heavy for the kind of storms we usually had. Scarlet. My name echoed up the stairwell. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He stretched the syllables out, soft and slow, as if tasting them. It did not sound like a question. It sounded like he was sure I would come closer. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was some older student I did not recognize in the weird light. All of those maybes collided in my head at once. Instinct shoved them aside. You will hear him today. Do not answer when he calls your name. I swallowed. The air in the corridor felt colder than it should have. My breath puffed out in a faint cloud. "Scarlett," the voice called again, louder this time, closer. The sound did not match the storm outside. It did not sound muffled or distorted the way voices usually did in stairwells. It was too clear, too close, like someone whispering directly into my ear while standing meters away. Every part of me wanted to respond out of habit. That is what you do when someone calls your name. You answer, you look, you step toward the sound. I locked my jaw and forced my feet to move in the opposite direction, toward the front of the school. I fixed my eyes on the sliver of daylight at the end of the corridor and walked. Behind me, the stairwell door creaked open wider. The voice followed. "You know it is rude to ignore people." The words were flat, almost amused. I focused on counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I reached the corner and turned, I would be in sight of the front office. There would be people there, adults, noise. This would break whatever weird, tight feeling was wrapping around my chest. "Come on, just look at me," he said. I turned the corner without looking back. The noise of the main hallway rushed over me like water. Students shoved past, muttering about the snow. A teacher stood near the doors, holding them open for a cluster of kids. The intercom crackled again as the secretary reminded us about bus departures. It all felt almost too normal after the silence of the side corridor. I did not stop until I was outside, my boots sliding slightly on the slushy steps. The wind punched into my face, cold and sharp, jerking tears into my eyes. I walked straight to my usual route home, ignoring the line of buses, ignoring the way my hands shook inside my gloves. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, something my parents usually only did before bed. My mother frowned when she saw me do it. "Everything all right?" she asked in French. "Storm is bad," I said. "They sent us home early." I did not tell her about the notes. I did not tell her about the voice on the stairs that knew my name. Parents in small towns either dismiss that kind of thing as nonsense or overreact so hard you regret saying anything. I did not want either. That night, the storm knocked out the power for 3 hours. We lit candles and pretended it was fun. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind push against the walls, and thought about the man on the stairs, the shape of his shoulders, the way his voice had sounded too close, the exact feeling that had crawled along my spine like cold fingers when he said my name. The next morning, school opened late. When I reached my locker, there was another note waiting inside. "Good girl." I left it there, folded and untouched, until the end of the day. Then I took all 4 notes home and burned them in the sink while the exhaust fan roared overhead. People still tell stories about our school. Sometimes they are about the girl in the old uniform, seen in the reflection of the trophy case. Sometimes they are about footsteps in the 3rd floor hallway that was supposedly sealed off years ago. I do not correct them. I do not mention the man on the back stairs who knew my name and wanted me to look at him. I graduated and got out of that town. The school has been updated again since then. They say it is safer now, brighter, more open. Maybe that is true. Maybe fresh paint and new lights are enough. But every time I see a photo of the building online, with its big glass entrance and its cheerful banners, I find myself staring at the shadowed rectangle where the back stairwell door would be, just out of frame. And I wonder who hears their name called there now, and whether they listen. I was 15 when one of the boys in my class vanished between school and home, and the whole town pretended it was an unsolvable mystery instead of admitting we had all seen the warning signs. Our town clung to the edge of a lake in northern Ontario, the kind of place where winter stayed longer than it should, and summer smelled like gasoline, pine, and fish guts. There was one main road, one high school, one grocery store, and about 1,000 people who all liked to say nothing truly bad ever happened there, because admitting otherwise meant admitting they were not really in control of anything at all. His name was Liam. I did not know him well enough to call him a friend, not really. We were in the same grade and had played on the same floor hockey team in 8th, which in a town like ours meant I knew the way he laughed when he was really tired and the way his ears went bright red when a teacher called on him unexpectedly. He was one of those quiet kids who slipped through hallways without attracting much attention, thin and long-limbed, with a habit of pulling his hood up whenever he walked outside, no matter the weather. Liam lived farther out than most of us, in a small cluster of houses about a 40-minute walk from the school if the weather cooperated. There was a bus route that passed not too far from his place, but for reasons nobody ever fully explained, he usually walked. People in town said he liked the peace and the time to think. Kids said his stepfather hated dealing with the school and refused to sign the bus forms. Whatever the reason, it meant that almost every afternoon, after the last bell, Liam would sling his backpack over one shoulder and head down the same narrow trail that cut from the back of the school grounds into the trees and eventually spat him out near the lakeshore road. Most of us used that trail sometimes. It was faster if you were heading to the docks or cutting over to the little convenience store near the marina. In the fall, it smelled like damp leaves and cold mud. In the spring, it turned into a river of slush and exposed roots. If you walked it alone at dusk, you always told yourself that the creaks and snaps in the underbrush were just animals. In a way, that trail was like the whole town, familiar enough to feel safe, wild enough to hide things. The first time I noticed something wrong was in early October, when the air had that sharp edge that made your lungs sting a little. I stayed late for a science project and ended up leaving around the same time as Liam. As I stepped out the back doors, I saw him ahead of me, already heading toward the trail, his backpack hanging low. I jogged a few steps to catch up, more out of boredom than friendliness. "Hey," I said, "you going the lake way?" He glanced back, then shrugged. "Yeah." We walked in silence for a bit, the school shrinking behind us. The trailhead was just a break in the chain-link fence where generations of kids had bent it enough to make a gap. As we stepped through, I noticed a dark blue truck idling on the side of the gravel access road, just off school property. It faced the fence, angled like it had been parked there to watch. The engine was running, but the driver sat completely still. The windows were tinted just enough that I could not see a clear face, only the outline of someone behind the wheel. Liam's shoulders tensed under his hoodie for a second, then relaxed. He did not look at the truck. He did not have to. You know when someone has been in your space more than once. Your body recognizes it even if your mind pretends not to. "Do you know them?" I asked. "Just some guy," he said too quickly. "He parks there sometimes." "That is weird." "Yeah, whatever." He kicked at a rock and sent it skittering down the path, probably just waiting for someone. We both knew that was not true. There was nowhere else to go from that access road. No houses or businesses. Nothing to wait for except the stream of kids who cut through the fence every day. I glanced back once before the trees swallowed the view. The truck had not moved. I felt eyes on us until the trail curved and the sound of the engine faded under the crunch of leaves. After that, I started seeing that truck more often, always after school, always near the trailhead or along the lakeshore road where the trees grew close to the ditch. Sometimes it sat empty, door closed, windows up. Sometimes there was a shape in the driver's seat, still and watchful. I never saw anyone get out. I never saw it around town during the day. It existed only at that hour when the sun tilted low and the shadows stretched long. I tried to mention it to a teacher once, half joking, like I did not want to be taken too seriously in case it was nothing. "There's this truck that is always parked by the back trail," I said to Mr. Reed after class. "Kinda creepy." He made a non-committal sound, shrugged, and told me kids these days watch too many crime shows. Adults like to believe that as long as they are paying attention inside the school, the outside world will behave itself. Not long after Thanksgiving, petty rumors started swirling about Liam. Someone said they had seen him arguing with his stepfather in the grocery store parking lot. Someone else claimed he had been skipping his last class to go smoke by the docks with older kids. People love other people's drama, especially when their own lives are quiet. Nobody ever asked him directly. They just watched and repeated things. Then came the day he disappeared. It was a Wednesday in late October, gray and damp. The kind of day where the sky pressed down on the town and the lake looked more like a sheet of metal than water. Classes dragged. By the last bell, most of us spilled from the building as fast as we could, collars up against the drizzle. I did not see Liam leave, but plenty of others did. He went out the back, same as always, hood up, hands jammed into his pockets. Few kids said later they noticed he kept looking over his shoulder. Nobody thought enough of it at the time to ask why. I took the front route that day because I had to stop by the pharmacy for my mom. By the time I reached the corner where my street met the Lakeshore Road, the usual traffic of pickup trucks and aging sedans had thinned. I paused there, out of habit, looking toward the stretch of road that ran parallel to the lake and the tree line. That was when I saw it. The dark blue truck crawled past, slow, so slow it almost rolled backwards between spurts of movement. The driver's window was cracked just enough for a narrow strip of skin to show, an elbow hooked on the sill, a pale hand tapping the outside of the door. The truck passed the turnout where the trail ended, then eased onto the shoulder and stopped, hazard lights dark. It sat there like a predator that had finally chosen a spot. I remember thinking I should write down the plate. I should go back to the school and tell someone again. I should do something more than stand there. Then the sky opened a little harder, rain seeping down my neck, and I told myself I was being dramatic. Liam would be fine. He always walked that way. The worst that would happen was he would get soaked. The next morning, his desk and homeroom was empty. At first, nobody panicked. Kids missed school all the time. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he had finally convinced someone to let him take the bus and just did not come in. By third period, teachers were trading glances in the hallway. By lunch, people were whispering. By last bell, there were police cars in the parking lot. Word spread fast in a town like ours. By dinner, everyone knew. Liam had never made it home. His mother called the school, then the police. He had not shown up at any friend's house. His stepfather insisted he had no idea where the boy had gone, that whatever trouble he had brought on himself had nothing to do with them. Phrases like runaway and teenage phase were thrown around in the first 24 hours, because it is easier to believe a kid chose to vanish than to accept they might have been taken. Then they brought in the dogs. The search started at the trail, of course. That dirt path, which had always just been a shortcut, became a crime scene almost overnight. Yellow tape fluttered at the entrance where the fence gaped. Officers in dark jackets moved through the trees in a slow, methodical line. Helicopters thumped overhead, their presence so alien and loud that every animal in the forest must have fled. Volunteers combed the ditches along the Lakeshore Road, eyes scanning for any shred of clothing, any broken branch that meant something more than wind. I walked with my dad the second day because not going felt worse than being there. The air tasted like cold metal. Every few steps, someone would call Liam's name into the trees, as if he might have simply gotten lost and needed help finding his way back. Nobody said out loud what we were really looking for. A few days into the search, I overheard two officers talking near the temporary command tent set up in the school parking lot. They found tire tracks near the trail end, one said quietly. Same spot, over and over. Looks like someone was pulling in there a lot. The other grunted. Any description? Dark pickup. Maybe blue. Maybe black. Kids are not great witnesses. I felt something twist sharply in my gut. I saw again the way that truck had crawled past, the hand on the window, the way it had settled into the shoulder, like it belonged there. I opened my mouth to say something, then closed it again. I had already told a teacher about the truck weeks before, brushed off as paranoid. Telling the police now felt like confessing that I had been right and too cowardly to push harder. Shame can be as heavy as fear. They never found him. They dragged parts of the lake. They sent divers along the shallower coves. They followed up on every reported sighting from neighboring towns. For months, Liam's face stared back at us from posters in the grocery store, the post office, the school entrance. His picture on the missing flyers looked younger than the boy I remembered, like it had been taken before his eyes started flinching away from direct stares. People in town shifted the story over time, the way they always do. Some said he had hitchhiked with the wrong person. Others swore they had seen him alive and well in Thunder Bay or Sault Ste. Marie, smiling and working some retail job, believing that let them tuck the story away as a lesson about rebellious teenagers. The idea that someone had waited for him over and over, learning his routine, choosing the exact right day when the sky was low and the town was tired, that was harder to carry. A year later, the school board closed off the back trail for safety reasons. They put up a taller fence and a proper gate, locked every afternoon. Officially, it was to discourage trespassing and keep bears out of the yard. Unofficially, it was because nobody wanted to look at that gap in the fence and remember the boy who walked through it one last time and never came back. Sometimes when I go home to visit, I drive the lakeshore road at dusk. The trees still lean over the ditch, thick and dark. The turnout near the end of the old trail is grown over now, grass pushing through the gravel, but the shape of it is still there if you know where to look. I slow down, without meaning to, my hands tightening on the steering wheel, waiting to see that dark blue truck idling where it used to. I never do. The world moved on. New students came. The town got another coat of paint. People mentioned Liam less and less, until his name became something you only heard in lowered voices when the power went out or when a stranger's vehicle lingered too long near the schoolyard. What stays with me are the little moments that did not seem important at the time. The way his shoulders tensed when he saw that truck. The choice he made to walk alone every day because that was his routine, and routine feels like safety. The way I told myself I was imagining things because no one else seemed worried. In cities, people like to think horror lives in shadows and alleys. In small Canadian towns, it lives in the space between what we notice and what we are willing to act on. One boy vanished on a walk he had taken 100 times before, and all we ever found were tire tracks in the mud and a trail that no one is allowed to use anymore. I still dream about that road sometimes. In the dream, I'm back on the corner, watching the truck slow down. I open my mouth and actually shout this time, wave my arms, run toward the school to drag an adult outside. In those dreams, the truck jerks forward, startled, and keeps going. Liam comes out of the trees a minute later, annoyed but safe, and we both call each other idiots for being paranoid. Then I wake up in the dark, far from that lake, far from that town, knowing that in real life I just stood there and watched the truck pull over, and the only person who could have told us what happened on that trail never made it home to say. I was 14 when I first realized that adults in small towns do not have to be monsters to be dangerous. Sometimes all it takes is a smile that stays on their face a beat too long, and a community that refuses to see anything wrong. My town sat in the interior of British Columbia, wedged between low mountains and a logging road that everyone pretended was a highway. We had one high school, one arena, 2 churches, and more rumors than streets. When our new science teacher arrived that fall, most people were just happy the district had finally filled the position. His name was Mr. Haynes. On paper, he was exactly what the school needed. Mid-30s, well-spoken, big city degree, a portfolio of photos from hikes and trips he showed us on the first day as a way of breaking the ice. He had that easy charisma some teachers use like a tool, leaning back on his desk, laughing at jokes, telling the class he would treat us like adults if we acted like them. After a couple of weeks, half the class adored him. The other half, including me, sat back and watched. I am not the kind of person who hates authority automatically. My parents drilled politeness into me from an early age, but even on that first day, something about him set my nerves on edge. It was not anything you could point to directly. It was the way his eyes moved. When most people look around a room, their attention skims evenly. His attention stuck on certain students, mostly the girls, one by one, like fingers tracing names on a list. In a small town, popular pretty girls get noticed by everyone, so at first his compliments seemed harmless. "That color looks great on you." New haircut. Suits you. You have really expressive eyes, you know that. The girls giggled or rolled their eyes. Some of them liked the attention. Some pretended they did. Whenever he said something like that, he kept his tone just soft enough that anyone listening from a distance could write it off as friendly, but just intense enough that the person he was talking to knew it was meant to land differently. He never said anything like that to me. I was not exactly invisible, but I dressed in oversized hoodies, kept my hair in a messy bun, and sat closer to the back whenever possible. I had been dealing with my own mess for a while. An older cousin who had crossed more than one line when I was younger. A confession that tore my extended family in half. A year of awkward court dates and whispered conversations. By the time I started high school, I learned to read people fast. It is a survival skill. With him, the warning light flipped on immediately. Still, you cannot just accuse a teacher of being creepy because he compliments students, especially in a town that is desperate to hold on to any qualified staff it gets. So I did what most kids do. I watched. I collected small moments in my head, like evidence I might never get to use. There was the way he always stood just a little too close when he leaned over a girl's desk to help with her lab report. His hand on the back of her chair so she could not easily scoot away. The way he offered rides home after late practices to students whose parents worked shifts, insisting it was no trouble at all. The way he touched shoulders, elbows, the small of a back when he wanted someone's attention. Never quite long enough or obvious enough for anyone to call it out without being told they were imagining things. One afternoon in October, he decided we were all too wound up about midterms and announced an unplanned movie day. He dimmed the lights, rolled down the projector screen, and put on some nature documentary. The kind where nothing really happens except slow shots of animals and forests. Most of the class took the chance to whisper or scroll on their phones. I sat in the second to last row, pretending to take notes, while my eyes did what they always did, tracked movement. From where I sat, I could see his reflection in the dark window. He was not watching the movie. He was watching us. His gaze drifted, settled on one girl near the front, Sophie, who played volleyball and had that effortless, careless kind of beauty that made other girls jealous and boys stupid. She had leaned her head on her crossed arms, tired from practice. The light from the screen flickered over the back of her neck. He walked down the aisle slowly, stopping beside a few desks, making little comments about the documentary. When he reached her row, he paused. In the reflection, I saw his hand hover above her hair, fingers flexing once, twice, like he was fighting with himself. Then, so gently it almost did not look real, he touched a strand of her hair and let it slide between his fingers. My stomach turned. I do not know if she felt it, if she thought it was accidental, if she froze the way I had frozen so many times before, when someone I did not want touching me found an excuse anyway. He murmured something I could not hear and moved on. Two other students laughed at something on their phones, oblivious. On screen, some bird took flight in slow motion. After class, I cornered Sophie in the hall. Does he ever, I do not know, get too close? I asked. She laughed, but it sounded forced. He is just friendly. That is not really what I asked. Her smile faltered for a second. She looked around to make sure no teachers were near. He is kind of weird sometimes, she admitted. Like, last week he asked if my parents were strict and if I was allowed to go to parties. I said not really, and he was like, that is too bad. You seem like someone who could use a little fun. It was, whatever. Whatever. That word is a shield. It says, I do not want to deal with what this actually means. You know, you do not have to take rides from him, right? I said. Her eyebrows shot up. Who told you that? Nobody. I just see things. She shifted her books from one arm to the other, suddenly restless. It is not a big deal. It is just when my mom is on nights. He lives near my street anyway. That night, sitting at the kitchen table while my mom paid bills, I thought about telling her. The words hovered under my tongue. There is this teacher at school, and everyone loves him. But he gives me a bad feeling. He touches people too much. He watches. I pictured her face tightening, the way it had when I first told her about my cousin. I pictured the meetings, the calls, the way the town would close ranks around a popular teacher with references and a clean record. Instead, I asked a question that seemed safer. "Do you think someone can be dangerous without actually doing anything obviously wrong?" I said. She looked up from the stack of papers. "What do you mean?" "Like, if they just make you feel wrong inside." She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "Your feelings exist for a reason. If someone makes you uncomfortable, you are allowed to avoid them. You do not have to prove to anyone why." That was not the reassurance I wanted. I wanted her to say, "If a teacher does that, we will fix it." Instead, I got permission to keep my distance, which did nothing for anyone else in that classroom. As the year went on, lines kept getting blurred. He started an unofficial study group after school twice a week. On paper, it was open to everyone. In reality, the same handful of students showed up, mostly girls, mostly the ones he had singled out as bright or mature. He brought snacks sometimes. He complained about his workload and his dating life in a way that felt less like venting to students and more like testing how far he could push the idea that he was their friend, not their teacher. He added some of them on social media. At first, it was just liking their team photos or leaving comments like, "Proud of you all," on public posts. Then he started replying to their stories late at night. "You look nice." "Big day tomorrow. Get some sleep." "You still up?" Little messages that might have seemed harmless one by one, but when lined up in a row painted a picture I knew too well. When anyone my age complained, adults recited the same script. "He is just enthusiastic." You kids are lucky to have a teacher who cares so much. Maybe you are reading into things. Nobody wanted to see something ugly where they had decided goodness lived. It was not until after graduation that the cracks finally widened enough for the truth to leak out. I had left town by then, moved to Vancouver for college. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. "Did you see the article?" That was all it said, with a link underneath. My hand shook as I tapped it. The headline mentioned an investigation into a high school teacher in our district. The article was careful with its language. Allegations, boundaries, inappropriate communication. There were no details that would satisfy people who wanted a lurid story, but there were enough that people like me, people who had sat in that dim classroom and watched his hand hover over a sleeping girl's hair, understood exactly what was being said between the lines. Multiple former students had come forward. Messages had been saved. Screenshots were circulating quietly, blurred names and unblurred timestamps. School trips where room checks had been skipped. Late-night conversations that crossed every professional line. Nothing that would make a sensational news documentary on its own, but all together, a pattern that could no longer be brushed off as friendly or caring. I thought back to all the times I had nearly spoken up and had not. All the times I had watched him steer certain kids into staying late, into depending on him, into letting him into their lives outside of class, and I had only warned my closest friends to be careful. I knew what grooming looked like from the inside. I had seen it before in my own family. Somehow, knowing that had made me freeze instead of move. The school board placed him on leave, pending investigation. Some parents were outraged on his behalf, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that good teachers were under attack. Others stayed quiet, remembering the moments that had made them uneasy years earlier and wishing they had paid more attention. When I went home that Christmas, his car was gone from the staff parking lot. His nameplate had been removed from the science classroom door. The glass trophy case in the hallway still held the framed photo of the yearbook staff he had supervised, his smile wide and unbothered. One arm slung around a cluster of teenagers who had once trusted him completely. I walked past it with my mother on the way to drop off something at the office. She paused, then glanced at me. "That the teacher you asked about?" she said quietly. "Yeah." She was silent for a long moment. "I wish you had told me more," she said. "I wish I had asked better questions." I did not tell her that I had wished the same thing of everyone in that building for years. Teachers, parents, the principal, even myself. We had all felt something was off. We had all chosen, for different reasons, to look away or to frame it as something less serious than it was. People in small towns like to believe that monsters announce themselves with fangs and blood. They do not. They arrive with good resumes and easy laughs. They win awards. They get thank you cards from graduates. They learn exactly how much they can get away with under the cover of being nice. The horror in my story is not that one man crossed boundaries with students. It is that he did it in plain sight, and an entire community helped him hide by refusing to trust their own discomfort, by calling kids dramatic when they said something, felt wrong. I'm not scared of empty roads or dark forests the way I used to be. I'm scared of rooms full of people who insist there is nothing to be afraid of, while someone like him stands at the front of the class smiling and waits for the next girl to stay after the bell. I was 17 when I learned that a school can feel more haunted in daylight than most places do at night. My town sat in the flat middle of Manitoba, where winter seems to forget how to end and snowbanks turn into gray walls along the streets. The high school was a low brick building on the edge of town, next to an empty field the district kept saying would someday become new development. Until then, it was just wind, snow, and a place for drifts to pile up higher than the windows. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday in late January. Morning started out clear and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that makes your nostrils stick together when you breathe. By second period, the sky had gone from washed-out blue to a heavy slab of steel. During third period, you could barely see the houses across from the school through the smear of blowing snow. In our town, bad weather was just part of life. We had school during blizzards heavy enough that other provinces would have declared states of emergency. So when the principal's voice came over the speaker just after lunch, sounding tight, the whole class looked up. All after-school activities are canceled. Buses will be leaving early. Students who walk or drive are strongly encouraged to head straight home when the final bell rings. We all exchanged looks. The storm outside already sounded like someone was dragging huge sheets of sandpaper across the roof. If they were warning us this early, it meant things were only going to get worse. A few kids cheered at the idea of skipping practice. I felt a knot in my stomach instead. My problem was simple. My parents were out of town for 2 days visiting my grandmother, and our neighbor, who usually checked on me, could not get her truck started. I had texted my mom about the weather, and she had told me to go straight home and stay there. That was before the storm thickened to white noise. By last period, the wind was making the windows shudder hard enough that the teacher had to raise his voice to be heard. The dismissal bell finally rang, but hardly anyone left. The buses stayed parked because visibility on the highway dropped to almost nothing. A message went out that the main road was closed in both directions. Parents who had been planning to pick up their kids started calling the office, tying up the lines. One of the vice principals walked from classroom to classroom, his hair dusted with snow, telling teachers that students who lived close enough could sign out and try to walk, but everyone else needed to stay put for now. That was how about 100 of us ended up trapped in the building with a skeleton crew of staff while the storm turned the town into an erased sketch. At first, it felt like an unexpected sleepover. Teachers propped classroom doors open to make supervision easier. Someone wheeled a cart of juice and granola bars down the hall. Kids sat in clusters, swapping snacks and showing each other videos. The PA system crackled every half hour with updates that did not say much. Still too dangerous to send buses. Parents advised not to drive. Town plows struggling. I chose to sit in the library because it had the fewest windows and the thickest walls. From there, the storm sounded distant. like a radio turned low in another room. The librarian dimmed half the lights to save power, she said, though I suspected it was just habit. In the softer light, the rows of shelves felt taller than usual, like trees in a man-made forest. Around 4 o'clock, the power flickered. Every fluorescent tube in the ceiling blinked at once, turning the room into a stop-motion version of itself. Bright, dark, bright again. The computers blinked off and on. A few kids yelped and then laughed quickly because laughing is what you do when you're worried and do not want to show it. The storm outside roared louder, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. The PA system hissed to life. "This is the office," a voice said. Then it cut mid-sentence into nothing. A second later, the emergency lights came on. Small, yellowish bulbs near the doors, casting long shadows. The librarian frowned. "Probably an ice buildup somewhere," she muttered, more to herself than to us. "Stay here. I'm going to see what is going on." I watched her walk out into the hallway, her sensible shoes squeaking faintly on the floor. The door closed behind her, leaving the library quieter than I had ever heard it. Minutes passed. The students in the corner started a card game by phone flashlight. Others scrolled in the strange semi-dark, their faces lit from below, blue and ghostly. I kept staring at the blank computer monitors, their dark surfaces reflecting the emergency lights in stretched, warped shapes. Then the first message appeared. At the far end of the library, near the row of computers closest to the window, one screen flickered on by itself. No one sat there. The desktop should have required a password, but instead a single line glowed in the middle of the screen, stark against black. "Do not leave the room." For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I stood up, the hair on my arms rising under my sweater. One of the other kids noticed me staring and turned. "What?" he asked. "Look," I said, pointing. More heads turned, chairs scraped. A few people laughed nervously. "That is just some teacher messing with us," someone said. "They can send network messages from the office." "Power's half out," I replied, and the last announcement died in the middle. Before anyone could poke at the keyboard, the monitor clicked off. At the same time, a different one, 2 rows over, flashed on. "The doors must stay closed." The message sat there, white text on black, in a font I did not recognize. It did not look like any of the usual error messages the school's ancient computers threw up. It looked too clean, too deliberate. "This is stupid," a girl named Jenna muttered. She marched over and jabbed the power button. The screen went black. She turned to us with a see nothing expression. The PA crackled again, even though the speaker in the library had been silent earlier. "Students are asked to," the principal's voice began, then broke into static. Underneath the static, for just a heartbeat, I heard something else. A whisper, layered and many-voiced, like several people speaking at once, just out of sync. "Did you hear that?" I asked the boy nearest me. "Hear what?" he said. "It just glitched." The emergency lights dimmed for a moment, then steadied. Somewhere down the hall, a door banged open or shut in the wind. The storm's howl seeped into the quiet between breaths. The computers began to turn on one by one. This time, every monitor in the room woke up, pixels glowing. Each screen showed the same thing, our own library from high above. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. The angle was wrong for any CCTV camera I knew about. It looked like a top-down view from the ceiling, but there were no cameras there. Tiny icons marked where we were sitting, little white outlines of human shapes scattered between tables and shelves. As we watched, the icon shifted, moving in real time as kids stood or sat. A couple of people whooped, assuming it was some new app or a glitch feeding the emergency lighting system. "Okay, that is kinda cool," someone said. I did not think it was cool. I thought it was wrong. The outlines moved a fraction of a second before the people they represented did, as if predicting their motion instead of following it. When Jenna walked toward the door, her icon reached it first, paused, and then something else appeared on the map. A darker shape, tall and narrow, slid into view outside the drawn rectangle of the library. No features, just a black silhouette that did not match a human or any object I could name. It stood at the threshold on the screen, still, while Jenna's outline hovered on the inside. The actual door did not move. "What is that?" I whispered. No one answered. Everyone had gone quiet, staring at the nearest monitor. The storm outside pressed against the building, a constant low roar. In the screen's top-down view, the dark shape turned slow and deliberate, as if it were looking at each of us in turn. The nearest computer flicked to a different message. "Do not open the door." Jenna hesitated with her hand inches from the handle. "Okay, this is getting annoying," she said, but there was less confidence in her voice now. "Seriously, whoever is in the office needs to stop." "The librarian went out to check and has not come back," I said. Why would they waste time on a joke? As if on cue, the fire alarm chirped once and died. Not the full wail, just a single, strangled beep. Kids shifted closer together. One of the football players laughed too loudly and announced he was going to find a teacher. "That thing says, 'Do not open the door,'" another student said, pointing to the monitor. "Yeah. A computer says it, so it must be true," he snapped. He grabbed the handle and pulled. The door did not move. He frowned and pulled harder. The handle jerked but stayed closed, as if something heavy leaned against the other side. There was no sound of scraping, no visible obstruction. Just the stubborn refusal of the door to open more than a crack. "It is stuck," he said. "Frozen or something." "All the doors have push bars," I replied. "They're not supposed to freeze." On the monitors, the dark shape pressed closer to the drawn outline of the doorway. The icons representing us bunched up in the center of the room. One by one, the messages on the screens changed again. "Stay away from the walls. Do not go into the hall. He is walking." That last line made my throat go dry. "Who is he?" I muttered. Nobody had an answer. We stood there, a clump of teenagers in a pool of yellow light surrounded by dead books and dead computers that kept telling us what not to do. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that room, but the only way out was the door that would not open and the windows that showed nothing but a wall of white. Then faintly, under the wind, footsteps. Not on tile, on something hollow, like boots on the metal treads of a stairwell. Slow, measured, coming closer, then receding, then closer again, like someone pacing back and forth at the end of a hall. "There is another exit," one girl whispered, "through the back, by the stacks." "There is not," I said. "Just the emergency door to the courtyard, and it is probably drifted shut." Before we could argue, the PA came alive one more time. "Riley," a voice said. Not the principal. Not any teacher I recognized. It sounded wrong, stretched, too deep and too thin at the same time, like someone had layered two recordings that did not quite match. "Come to the office, please." Every head swung toward me. My name hung in the air, strange and heavy. "Do not," someone breathed. On the nearest monitor, my little white icon pulsed. Another message appeared on the screen, lines stacking over each other. "He knows your name. Do not answer. Do not come." The footsteps in the distance stopped. The storm seemed to hold its breath. "But if it is the office," one of the boys began. "The principal does not sound like that," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and if the office wanted me, they would send someone, not call me out in the middle of whatever this is. "Riley," the voice repeated, with more insistence, "we need you to come to the office now." My full name this time, first and last, wrapped in static. I closed my eyes for a second, took a breath, and did the only thing that made sense. Nothing. I stayed where I was. I did not move toward the door. I did not say "here," the way you automatically do when someone calls you in school. I stayed silent. Other kids started murmuring to each other, their voices rising and falling like waves. Nobody dared make a joke now. The computers hummed. The emergency lights buzzed. The storm threw itself at the building again and again. That strange layered voice on the PA called my name 3 more times, each one slower, each one dripping with a kind of disappointed patience that made my skin crawl. Then, all at once, it stopped. The monitors blinked off. The emergency lights brightened. Somewhere down the hall, the fire alarm gave a full, healthy blare before being silenced by harried footsteps and a human shout. A second later, the principal's real voice filled the library, slightly breathless. "Attention students, buses have been cleared to leave in town. We are dismissing everyone in an orderly fashion. Please proceed to the main foyer when a staff member comes to get your group." The librarian rushed back into the room, her cheeks flushed, her glasses fogged. "Sorry," she said. "We had a panel blow downstairs. You all okay?" No one mentioned the messages. No one talked about the maps or the dark shape by the door. By the time we shuffled out into the hallway, light and sound had returned enough that it became easy to tell ourselves it had just been a glitch or a shared overreaction. The brain prefers simple explanations when the alternative is having to accept that something impossible might have brushed against your life. At home that night, alone in my quiet kitchen, while the storm spent itself against the dark windows, I turned my phone over and over in my hands, wondering if I should tell my parents when they got back. I imagined my father's frown, my mother's nervous laugh, the way they would blame the building's old wiring or the stress of being cooped up. In the end, I said nothing. A week later, one of the tech staff mentioned offhand that the network connection to the library had been cut for hours during the storm. "No power up there at all," he said. "Lucky the emergency lights held." I did not tell him that the computers had been talking to us anyway. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had stepped into the hallway when that voice called my name, or if Jenna had managed to wrench the door open when those messages begged us not to. Maybe it would have been nothing, just a dark corridor, empty and cold, doors rattling in the wind. Maybe the only thing waiting would have been a draft that knocked the breath from my lungs. But when I remember the way that black shape turned one by one to face our little icons on the screen, and the way the door handle refused to move even under a linebacker's grip, I'm glad I chose to believe the warning instead of the familiarity of the intercom. People think storms are dangerous because of what happens outside. Cars sliding, power lines snapping, snow swallowing roads. After that day, I learned that sometimes the most dangerous part is what the storm lets inside, just for a little while, when the building groans and the lights flicker, and something that knows your name waits in the hallway, hoping you will answer. I was 16 the first time I realized the trees could watch you back. My town sat far enough north in British Columbia that most maps just showed a smear of green and a highway number. We had one main road, a motel that smelled like old coffee, a hockey rink, and a high school that doubled as a community center. Beyond that, it was just forest in every direction, thick and dark, pressing up against the edge of town like a slow, patient tide. My story starts on a road that looked the same as every other logging route in the region. Narrow, cracked, lined with jack pine and black spruce. The school district used it as the evening bus route for away games because it cut 20 minutes off the drive to the next town. During the day, it was just another stretch of asphalt. At night in winter, with snow piled high on either side and the sky black by 4:30, it felt like driving through a tunnel made of trees and ice. I played on the girls' basketball team, mostly because there was not much else to do. Away games were our excuse to leave town, even if it was only to another place just as small and quiet. That December evening, we had lost by 10 points, and everyone was tired and annoyed. We shoved our gear into the underbus compartment and climbed aboard, cheeks red from the cold, hair still damp from quick showers. Our driver, Mr. S., was one of those guys who had been old as long as anybody could remember. He wore the same thick parka all winter, kept a thermos of coffee within reach, and knew every bump and pothole on the highway by memory. He teased us about the loss as we filed past. "Do not worry," he said. "You will get them next time. Long drive home now, though. Settle in." I took my usual seat near the back on the left side where I could lean my head against the window and watch the dark blur by. The heaters hissed to life. The bus rumbled out of the small town's parking lot, crossed the single intersection with its blinking amber light, and turned onto the long road home. For the first half hour, everything felt normal. Girls talked in low voices, swapped snacks, scrolled on their phones until the service dropped to nothing and the signal bars died. The coaches sat near the front, going over plays they wanted us to run better next time. Out the window, the last bits of town light vanished, replaced by the endless line of trees. It is hard to explain how dark it gets that far north, unless you have seen it. There are no cities nearby to throw up a sky glow, no strip malls or neighborhoods. The bus headlights carved a narrow cone of yellow into the black. Beyond that, the forest swallowed everything. The snow along the ditches glowed dimly, then faded as we passed, like breath on glass. I was half asleep when the first thump came. It was not loud, just a dull impact somewhere near the back of the bus, on my side. The kind of sound you might expect if a branch swung down and hit the metal. A few girls glanced up, then went back to their conversations. Out here, hitting branches was normal. The ditches were full of them. A minute later, it happened again. Thump, slightly higher this time, closer to where my shoulder rested against the cold glass. "Did you hear that?" I asked the girl across the aisle, a grade 10 named Mia. "Hear what?" she said, pulling out an earbud. "Something hit the side." She shrugged. "Probably snow falling off the trees." I wanted to agree. It was the simplest answer. But when I pressed my hand to the window, I could feel a faint vibration that did not match the rhythm of the bus or the roughness of the road. It was more like a scraping, then a drag, like something heavy, sliding along the metal skin of the bus. We drove on. The trees rushed past in a blur, branches weighed down with snow, some nearly touching the top of the bus. The road curved. The headlights swung across the trunks, briefly illuminating a patch of forest, then plunging it back into darkness. The third impact was harder. This time the bus shuddered. A few girls yelped and grabbed the seatbacks. A hollow bang echoed through the interior like someone had hit the outside with a large, flat object. Mr. S swore under his breath. "Must have clipped a drift," he called back. "Hang on, road is bad here." But the road was not that bad. I had traveled it dozens of times. There were no turns sharp enough to send us into a bank like that. No steep ditches in this section. My heart started to pound, an electric, prickling feeling spreading across my shoulders. I turned my head to look straight out the window instead of letting my gaze blur. For a few seconds, all I saw were trees and snow. Then, just at the edge of the headlight beam, I saw movement. Something tall moved parallel to the bus, about 10 or 15 feet into the tree line. It was the right shape to be a person, upright, 2 arms, 2 legs, but far too big. The shoulders were high, almost level with the bottom branches of the smaller pines. The arms hung low, long enough that whatever it was could have reached down and touched the snow without bending much at all. It stayed just outside the light, keeping pace with us. When the bus hit a patch of rough road and slowed a little, the figure seemed to close the distance, its outline sharpening. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Mia squinted past me. "See what?" "There, between those 2 trees." She stared, then shivered. "I do not see anything. You are creeping me out." I blinked, and the shape was gone. Only darkness and the faint suggestion of trunks remained. Maybe it had been a trick of the branches, I told myself. A pattern of snow and shadow that looked like a body when I wanted to see one. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake the goosebumps from my skin. Then something slapped the window. It sounded like a hand, a flat, heavy hand smacking the glass right next to my head. The impact left no clear print, but a smear of moisture and dirt streaked across the outside, wide and long and higher than any of us could have reached without standing on the seats. I flinched and slid into the aisle. "Okay, that was not snow," I said louder than I intended. Other girls turned, their faces pale in the bus's overhead lights. "What happened?" our assistant coach called from a few rows up. "Something hit the window," I said. "Something big." Mr. S checked his mirrors. "Probably a branch," he said, but his voice had a tightness it lacked before. "We got a lot of low ones through here." Mia frowned. "Branches do not slap sideways at the glass," she muttered. The bus grew quieter. Conversations died into whispers. Even the usual rustle of chip bags and candy wrappers stopped. Everyone strained to listen, past the engine noise and the hiss of the heater. Outside, the trees thickened. The road entered a stretch locals called the tunnel, because the branches arched over it from both sides, forming a partial canopy. During the day, it was beautiful in a postcard kind of way. At night, it felt like driving into the throat of something. The bus slowed. Snow had drifted across the asphalt here, forming uneven ridges. As we rolled over them, the whole vehicle rocked. Somewhere above us, something scraped along the roof. It was a long sound, starting at the front and dragging all the way toward the back. Not the brittle clatter of ice or the light brush of twigs. It was deep and rough, like claws or thick branches being pulled along metal. Girls ducked instinctively, as if the roof might rip open any second. "What is that?" someone whispered. No one answered. Mr. S eased the bus even slower, almost to a crawl. "Hang tight," he said. "Drifts are nastier than I thought." I leaned just enough to look back out at the trees. For a second, everything lined up wrong. The branches in the peripheral vision, the dark between trunks, the after image of the bus interior reflected in the glass. Then, in that layered mess, I saw it clearly. A face watched us from between the trees. Face is the closest word, but it was not a human face. It was too tall for one thing, at least 8 feet off the ground. The eyes were the worst, pale, almost colorless, shining faintly like animal eyes in the dark. But they were set in a head that was too narrow, too long, the way dead trees sometimes grow in warped shapes after years of wind. I could not make out a mouth, just a dark slant, but I felt with absolute certainty that it was smiling. I jerked back, heart slamming against my ribs. "Zara," Mia said, "you look like you're going to be sick." "There is something out there," I said. "In the trees. It is following us." A nervous giggle rose from a few rows up. "Like Bigfoot," one of the younger girls chirped, trying to turn it into a joke. "Not like that," I snapped. "Taller. Wrong." Mr. S.'s eyes met mine in the overhead mirror. For a second, just a second, I saw recognition there instead of dismissal. "We are almost through the worst of it," he said. "Everyone stay in your seats." The scraping on the roof stopped. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe we had passed whatever strange pocket of wind or snow had caused all of it. The bus picked up speed as the drifts thinned. The trees opened slightly, letting in more of the dull, starless sky. Then, without warning, the bus lurched as if something had grabbed the back end and yanked. Girls screamed. Someone dropped a water bottle that rolled noisily down the aisle. The whole vehicle swayed, tires slipping toward the snowbank. Mr. S cursed and cranked the wheel, fighting the skid. For a second, I thought we were going to tip. The left side of the bus rose just enough that the girls on the right slid into each other. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the seat in front of me and held on until my knuckles hurt. Then the weight released. The bus thumped back level. Mr. S brought us to a grinding, shuddering stop, half on the road, half in the snow. No one moved. The only sounds were our breathing, ragged and fast, and the ticking of the engine. "You all right back there?" he called, voice strained. A chorus of shaky "yeahs" answered. "I'm going to check the rear tires," he said. "Everybody stay seated. I mean it. No one opens a window. No one gets off this bus." He grabbed his flashlight, shrugged into his parka, and walked down the aisle to the back door. As he passed my seat, I caught his sleeve. "You saw something too," I said. He hesitated. For a moment, the mask of calm adult slipped. "This road has stories," he said quietly. "Whatever you see, you keep your eyes inside, you hear me? Do not invite it closer." "Invite what?" I asked. He did not answer. He stepped down onto the snow and pulled the door closed behind him. The cold rushed in for that second, sharp enough to sting my lungs. Then we were sealed back in our yellow shell, adrift in the dark. We watched Mr. S's flashlight beam move along the side of the bus. It swung down to the wheels, up toward the roofline. It paused for a long time at the rear, as if he had found something he did not like. From where I sat, I could not see his face, only the white circle of light and his shadow moving. Something moved behind him. It was just a suggestion at first, a darker patch of dark between the trees at the edge of the headlights. Then it straightened, lifting up and up until it seemed to tower over him. The flashlight beam did not touch it. It remained a silhouette, taller than the bus, limbs too long for its body, shoulders as narrow as a sapling's trunk. "Do you see it?" I whispered. Mia nodded, eyes wide. Oh my God. The thing did not step forward. It did not rush the bus. It simply leaned a fraction, as if curious, watching. Its head tilted as Mr. S ran his hand along the metal, then stepped back, then turned toward the door. He did not look up. He did not look behind him at all. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he did not want to give whatever that was the satisfaction. He climbed back inside, face pale under his toque. "Snow built up around the axle," he said loudly for everyone to hear. "That is what pulled us. I cleared it. We are good to go." No one mentioned the outline in the trees. No one asked why there were long streaks along the back of the bus that looked less like snow scrapes and more like something with too many fingers had dragged along it. We drove the rest of the way in near silence. The scraping stopped. Nothing hit the windows again. By the time the first town lights appeared ahead of us, the bus felt almost safe again, like we had passed through something and come out the other side without really understanding how close we had been. Later that week, kids told each other about the thing in the trees in exaggerated voices, turning it into just another camp-style story to spook the grade 8s. Some said it was a wendigo. Others insisted it was just a moose distorted by weird light. The adults rolled their eyes and said the road was dangerous enough without inventing monsters. I did not argue. I also never sat on the left side of the bus again for the rest of the season. I chose the aisle, where the glass could not press cold against my shoulder, where I could not see the tree line clearly. The road is still there. Last time I went home, I drove it in my own car just to see if it felt different. In daylight, the tunnel of trees looked almost pretty. I pulled over briefly at the spot where the bus had lurched, my hazard lights blinking in the empty quiet. There were no marks on the pavement, no sign of anything unusual, just snow and trees, and the thin, constant whisper of wind through needles. As I stood there, though, I could not shake the feeling that something in the tree line recognized me, that if I stayed too long, if I walked a few steps into the shade between trunks, I would not be alone. That whatever had reached for the bus that night was still there, patient as the forest itself, waiting for the next set of headlights to slow down and the next set of windows to press a human face against the glass. I was 13 when I learned that some stories are not made up to scare kids away from old buildings. My town clung to the rocky coast of Nova Scotia, a scatter of houses, a wharf, one general store, and a school that had been temporary since before my parents were born. Everyone knew everyone else, and everyone knew about the woman in the window. That was what we called her anyway. The old schoolhouse sat on a hill above the harbor, a 2-story wooden building with peeling white paint and a bell tower that had not rung in decades. It had been replaced by the low, modern school closer to the road, then boarded up, then mostly ignored. Kids biked past it every day. Fishermen lined up their trucks along the bottom of the hill to watch the weather come in. Tourists sometimes took photos, saying it looked quaint. They did not know the rule all of us grew up with. Do not be near that place after dark, and if you see anyone in the upstairs window, keep walking. The legend changed depending on who told it. Some said a teacher had died there in the 50s, locked in by accident during a fire drill and overcome by smoke when the furnace malfunctioned. Others insisted it had been a student who climbed out the window on a dare, jumped, and broke her neck on the rocks below. A few swore it went back even further, to when the building was a boarding house, and a woman who lost her child watched the road every night until she died, waiting for someone who never came home. The only part everyone agreed on was this. On certain nights, if you looked up, you would see a woman standing in the second-floor window, staring out over the town. And if she ever turned her head to look right at you, that meant you were next. When you're little, adults tell you things like that, half joking, half serious, the way they do with old warnings about tides and ice. By the time I hit junior high, I mostly treated it as a story to tell new kids. It made the town feel more interesting, like we had our own urban legend instead of just fog and fish. Then, in October of 8th grade, a new girl moved to town and everything changed. Her name was Ellie. She came from Halifax, which made her practically a celebrity in our class. She wore her hair in a high ponytail, had city sneakers that looked too clean for our muddy roads, and talked about malls like they were normal places people went on weekends. The first week, she seemed excited about everything. The harbor, the cliffs, the way you could see the stars so clearly at night. The whole town has main character energy, she said once at lunch, chewing on a fry from the school cafeteria, like something spooky could happen any second. You have no idea, my friend Jonah said. He launched into the story of the woman in the window with all the practiced timing of someone who had told it 100 times. Ellie listened, with her head tilted, smiling, but there was something in her eyes that did not quite match the expression. When he got to the part about, if she looks at you, you are next, she laughed. So basically, do not go near the creepy abandoned building, she said. You know, if this was in Halifax, it would be full of graffiti and kids vaping in the back. It is old, I said. The floorboards are rotten. My dad says it is a miracle no one has fallen through the stairs already. Has anyone actually seen her? She asked. Like really seen her? Not friend of a friend? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I had seen something once, a pale blur behind the dirty glass, late one winter afternoon while walking home. I told myself it was a reflection from a passing car. Saying it out loud now felt like admitting something I was not supposed to. People have, Jonah said quickly. My cousin swears. Your cousin swears about a lot of things, I cut in. They also told you there were sharks in the inlet. We all laughed. The conversation moved on to other topics. But later, when the final bell rang and we walked toward the buses, Ellie fell into step beside me. You have seen something, she said quietly. I could tell. You shut up way too fast. I shrugged. I saw a shape once. Could have been anything, the glass is filthy. That is not a no. It is not a yes either. She bumped my shoulder with hers. You know what this means, she said. We have to go see it. Absolutely not. Come on. Every horror story starts with a new kid wanting to see the haunted place. It is practically a law. In every horror story, that is also how people die. She made a face. You really believe it? Like actually? I did not know how to answer that. I believed in fog that could swallow boats, and black ice you did not see until you were already skidding. I believed in currents that looked calm from shore and ripped you under in seconds. Those were real horrors. The woman in the window, she hovered somewhere between superstition and something deeper. A shared unease passed down like a family recipe. I believe in not messing with things that do not bother me, I said finally. She grinned. Then technically, if we go say hi, she is bothering us first. A week later, when the fog rolled in and the town decided to pretend Halloween was a whole season instead of one night, Ellie brought it up again. This time, she had a plan. "Saturday," she said. "You, me, Jonah. We walk up there before it is totally dark. We look. If nothing happens, cool, story busted. If something weird happens, we run. No staying, no talking to ghosts, no splitting up, just look and go." "You are really not going to let this go, are you?" I asked. "Nope." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe part of me wanted proof one way or the other. Maybe part of me wanted to see if the story held up when pushed. Or maybe I just did not want to be the kid who backed out in front of the girl from the city. Saturday came cold and damp. By late afternoon, a fine mist had settled over everything, blurring the line between water and air. The streetlights flicked on early, halos glowing in the fog. We met at the bottom of the hill as the church bell chimed 5 times. "Perfect horror movie lighting," Ellie said, pulling her jacket tighter. Jonah looked less sure. "This is stupid," he muttered. "If my dad sees us up there, he will ground me until graduation." "We are not going inside," I said. "We are just walking by." We made our way up the cracked sidewalk, boots crunching on gravel. The old schoolhouse loomed above us, its windows dark holes, its bell tower a jagged shape against the gray sky. Up close, it smelled like wet wood and something older underneath, like dust and mice and chalk from another century. "Front or side?" Ellie asked. "Side," Jonah said immediately. "Closer to the road." We walked along the base of the hill until we were directly under the second-floor corner window everyone always talked about. It faced the harbor and a sliver of the main street, a perfect place for someone to stand and watch most of the town. "Okay," Ellie said. "Ready?" I did not feel ready, but I nodded anyway. We stepped off the sidewalk onto the damp grass and craned our necks to look up. At first, there was nothing, just the warped frame of the window, streaks of grime running down the glass, the faint reflection of the foggy sky. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "See?" I said. "Nothing. It is just a..." She appeared between one blink and the next. One moment the window was empty. The next there was a woman standing there. She was not a blur. She was not a trick of light. She was as solid as any teacher I had ever had, except for the fact that she did not move. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. She wore a long, dark dress, high at the neck, the kind you only see in old photographs. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was pale and absolutely expressionless. My throat closed around the rest of my sentence. "Oh," Ellie whispered. The word came out on a cloud of breath. "I told you," Jonah hissed. "We need to go." "Wait," Ellie said. "She's just standing there." That was the part that made my skin crawl. She did not sway. She did not blink. The fog outside drifted, making faint shadows across the glass, but she remained perfectly still. It felt less like she was a person in a room and more like she was part of the building, etched into it. "We are done," I said, taking a step back. "We saw her. We can tell everyone. Let us go." "Just 1 second," Ellie said. She lifted a hand in a small, hesitant wave. "Hi." "Are you insane?" Jonah whispered. "It is polite," she shot back, eyes never leaving the window. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then the woman's head turned. It was a tiny movement, but it felt huge. She did not lean forward, did not open her mouth. Her head turned slowly, smoothly, until her eyes lined up with ours. Even from that distance, I could see they were wrong, not glowing, not hollow, just too flat, too dark, like the pupils had swallowed the color. The air around us seemed to thin. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. "That is it," I said. "We are going." I reached for Ellie's sleeve. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, something sharp sliced through the inside of my head. A flash of cold, like sticking your face into winter water. And for an instant, I was not looking up at the window anymore. I was looking out. From up there, the town looked small and pale, muffled by fog. The harbor lights were smudges, the road a ribbon, and 3 children stood at the base of the hill, necks craned, faces tilted up in the exact expression of people who thought they were the ones doing the watching. Then it was gone. I staggered, nearly pulling Ellie down with me. "Ashton," she said. "You okay?" I nodded too fast. "We're leaving," I managed. "Now." This time, neither of them argued. We turned and walked quickly back toward the sidewalk. I forced myself not to run. Every step felt like wading through syrup. The urge to look back burned in my spine. I did not give in until we reached the corner. The window was empty again. No woman, no face, just grime and reflections. If it had not been for the leftover ache behind my eyes and the way my stomach lurched, I might have convinced myself we had imagined it. We did not talk much on the way home. At the intersection where Jonah's street branched off, he stopped. "We are not telling anyone about that," he said. "Why not?" Ellie demanded. "You wanted proof. We got proof." "They will just say we are making it up for attention," he said, "or that we saw a shadow, or that someone was playing a prank. And my dad will say he told me not to go near there and ground me anyway." He had a point. Adults in small towns liked their stories as long as they stayed stories. Evidence complicated things. "Fine," Ellie said. "Then we know. That is enough." It was not enough, not really. But we nodded, went our separate ways, and did our best to pretend everything was normal. That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning with the heavy feeling of being watched. The house was dark. The only sound was the wind against the eaves. I told myself it was just the leftover fear from earlier, that my brain was replaying images because it had nothing better to do. On my way to the bathroom, I glanced out my bedroom window, more out of habit than anything. From my house, you could see the hill where the old school stood, a crooked silhouette against the sky. There was a light in the second-floor window. Not bright, not enough to be a lamp. Just a faint, steady glow, as if a candle burned behind the glass. And in front of it, barely visible, the outline of a figure standing perfectly still. I closed the curtain and did not look again. For the next week, small things went wrong. Jonah slipped on seaweed at the wharf and cut his leg open badly enough to need stitches. Ellie's dad's truck rolled into a ditch on a perfectly clear day when the brakes failed for no apparent reason. At school, a shelf in the supply closet collapsed right after I walked out, smashing the box of glass beakers I'd been sent to get. None of it was catastrophically awful. None of it was enough to point at and say, "That is the woman in the window." But each time, I thought about the way her head had turned, the way I had seen the town from her vantage point for that single ice-cold second. We never went back up that hill together. Ellie stopped making jokes about horror stories and started crossing the street a little earlier whenever we walked past. Once, months later, she asked me quietly, "When she looked at us, did you feel anything?" I thought about lying. Instead, I said, "I think she wanted to see what it felt like to be us, just for a second." Ellie nodded, face pale. "I think she did." The old school still stands. The town has talked about tearing it down for years, but somehow there is always a budget issue, a more urgent repair, a reason to leave it alone. Some nights, when the fog rolls in just right and the harbor lights make everything glow from below, people swear they see a woman in the window, watching. Most say it with a smile, as if it is just another charming piece of local folklore. I say nothing. I just listen and remember what it felt like to have a stranger's view pressed over my own, and to know, with a cold certainty that has never quite left me, that in that moment, the story was not about us watching her at all. It was about her choosing who to watch next. I was 19 when I realized that some of the monsters from high school do not stay there. My town in Alberta was one of those places built around a highway and an oil field, with a Tim Hortons at one end, a gas station at the other, and not much in between. After graduation, people either left for the city or circled back through the same handful of jobs. I stayed and took a shift job at a small coffee shop just off the main road, the kind of place where half the customers wore reflective jackets and the other half wore church clothes. The coffee shop became my entire world for a while. I opened at 6 most mornings, watched the regulars shuffle in like clockwork, learned exactly how much cream each of them wanted without asking. Truckers passing through, workers from the plant, moms with strollers, the occasional tourist lost on their way to somewhere better. It was busy enough that the days went by fast, but small enough that anyone new stood out. That is why I noticed him the first time he walked in. At first, I just saw the back of his jacket, the school logo for my town, the same wolf mascot that had been slapped on every shirt, banner, and gym wall since before I was born. I froze with a pot of coffee in my hand because hardly anyone kept those jackets after graduation, and even fewer wore them years later. When he turned toward the counter, my stomach dropped. "Layla," he said, like we had run into each other at a reunion instead of a place I had carefully built far away from old memories. "Wow. Look at you, all grown up." Mr. Coulson had been my biology teacher in 10th and 11th grade. Back then, he was in his early 30s, with an easy laugh and one of those open, friendly faces that made parents say things like, "You kids are lucky to have a teacher who cares." He cracked jokes in class, brought in weird specimens in jars, stayed after school to help kids cram for exams. Everyone liked him, even I had, at first. That was before I started noticing the comments that were a little too personal. The way his eyes lingered a little too long when some of the girls leaned over their desks. The way he used, "You can trust me," like a key to unlock parts of our lives he had no business being in. I would have written it off as my own paranoia if I had not heard the small, uncomfortable laughs some of the other girls made when he complimented their clothes or messaged them after midnight to check in about an assignment. By the time I was in 12th grade, he had become a background unease in my memory, someone I was relieved to be done with. I never expected to see him again, and yet there he was, standing at my counter in a worn-out school jacket, smiling like we were old friends. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice not to crack. "Long time." "You work here now?" he asked, glancing around. "Nice. This place has gotten popular. I've been in a few times when you were not here." That made my skin prickle. The idea that he had been in my safe little bubble without me knowing felt like someone had come into my bedroom while I was out. "What can I get you?" I asked, switching to the automatic script that never failed me. "Just a coffee black," he said. Then with a little laugh, "You're allowed to card me if you want, but I swear I'm old enough." It was a bad joke, but he delivered it with the same rehearsed charm he used to use on parents at conferences. I poured his coffee, rang him through, and hoped that would be the end of it. It was not. He started coming in more often after that. Not every day, but close. Sometimes in the morning on his way to a meeting, sometimes in the evening, when the rush had died and the shop was half empty. He always chose the corner table with a clear view of the counter. He always made a point of coming through my line, even if it meant waiting longer. "You must be tired," he would say. "These shifts are brutal. Make sure you are taking care of yourself." "How late are you here tonight?" he would ask, eyes flicking to the clock. It is not safe for a girl to be walking home alone after dark. Once, when I mentioned I was turning 20 soon, he smiled in a way that made my gut twist. 20, huh? Now, I really could have taken you out for a drink back when you were in my class, he said. Shame we missed that window. I laughed it off because what else was I supposed to do in the middle of my workplace with a line of customers behind him? Later, in the break room, my hands would shake so hard I would spill sugar packets. I told myself he was just awkward, that he did not mean it the way it sounded, that I was overreacting because of everything that had happened in high school. I tried to shove down the memory of how he had insisted on driving one girl home after a late lab, how she had gone quiet in class afterward and dropped the course without explaining why. Then, one slow Tuesday night, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I slipped it out on my way to wipe down a table, expecting a text from my mom. It was a friend request. His name stared up at me, the same smiling staff photo from the school website as his profile picture. Our only mutual connections were old classmates. My thumb hovered over the screen, absurdly aware of how alone I was in that moment. My coworker had just gone to take the garbage out back. The only customer left was an older woman reading in the corner. I declined the request and slid my phone back into my pocket. Less than a minute later, a message request popped up. "You do not accept friend requests from old teachers." I deleted it without responding. My heart thudded hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. That night, lying in bed, I scrolled his profile. He had moved to another town after I graduated. There were group photos with students from that school, smiling at science fairs and field trips, posts about the best group of grads a teacher could ask for, comments from parents thanking him for going above and beyond. It made my stomach turn. Several weeks passed. He kept coming in. He stopped making outright creepy comments, but the familiarity remained, like he had decided we were allies in some private joke. Then someone sent me an article. It was a link from a regional news site, the kind that mostly covered local sports and road closures. The headline mentioned an investigation into inappropriate electronic communication between teacher and students. The small staff photo under it was him. The article was careful, using words like allegations and professional boundaries, but it did not have to be explicit. It said he had been suspended from his position at his new school while the district looked into reports of late-night messaging and suggestive comments directed at multiple students over several years. It mentioned that screenshots had been provided. It said law enforcement had been notified out of an abundance of caution. I read it 3 times, then sat there staring at the wall. Suddenly, all the little things I had brushed off over the years rearranged themselves into a pattern I recognized all too well. The extra help sessions with only certain girls, the rides home, the checking in messages, the way he always framed things as concern, so that if you felt uncomfortable, it seemed like you were the one being ungrateful. At the bottom of the article, there was a line that made me cold all over. The teacher previously worked at other schools in the province. That meant us. I thought about the girls who had been in my classes, the ones who had laughed a little too hard at his jokes because saying no felt risky, the ones who had stayed in the lab long after everyone else had left, the ones who might not have had anyone to tell, or who had told someone and been brushed off. The next time he walked into the coffee shop, it was different. He did not wear his old school jacket. He kept his head down. There were deep lines around his mouth that had not been there before. "Usual?" I asked, voice neutral. He nodded, without quite meeting my eyes. His hands shook slightly as he passed me the money. For the first time, he looked smaller, but not in a way that made me feel sorry for him. More like I was seeing him without the mask he had worn for years. "How have you been?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Busy." He hesitated. "If you see anything about me online." "I did," I said, cutting him off. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed level. "And I saw enough back then, too." For a second, his face twisted into something like anger. Just a flash, gone almost before it appeared. Then he forced a smile. "You always did have a vivid imagination," he said. "Take care of yourself, Layla." He left his coffee untouched on the counter and walked out. He did not come back after that. A few months later, word went around that he had left the province. The investigation, people said, had found some issues, but no charges were laid. Parents argued about it in Facebook groups. Some defended him, saying things like, he was just a good teacher who cared too much. Others said they had always had a bad feeling. I thought about all the chances our small town had to look at his behavior clearly and chosen instead to see what they wanted to see: a dedicated educator, a friendly face, a man who gave their kids attention in a place where not much happened. I thought about how close he had come to slipping back into my life without anyone questioning it. People here like to talk about big city crime as if it is something that happens far away to other kinds of people. They watch true crime documentaries and say things like, "You cannot trust strangers." What they do not say, what they do not like to admit, is that the darkest things can sit across from you at parent-teacher night, or hand you a graded test with a smile, or stand at your counter years later asking how you have been. The horror in my town did not come from the highway, or the fields, or the night. It came from the way we excused a man because he wore a lanyard and a nice shirt, because he coached teams and wrote reference letters and knew everyone's names. It came from how easy it was for him to keep doing the same things in different places, over and over, wrapped in gratitude and trust. I still work at the coffee shop. I still pour coffee and make small talk. But when someone from the past walks in now with that too familiar smile, I trust the knot in my stomach more than the stories people tell about how good they are. Next time, I will not wait for an article to prove I was right. I was 18 when I first got the feeling that someone's eyes were still on me long after high school ended. My town in Ontario was one of those places that sits just far enough from the city to feel forgotten, with one strip mall, 2 traffic lights, and a high school that looked more like a bunker than a place kids were supposed to learn. When people graduated, they scattered. College in bigger towns, jobs out west, whatever they could find. I thought leaving would mean closing the door on all of that. Instead, it turned out one person had been treating those years like a starting point. The first time I noticed her, I did not really notice her at all. She was just another face in the hallways. Quiet, always by the lockers near the science wing. Long, dark hair, hiding most of her expression. We never shared more than a couple of classes. I could not have told you her favorite band or who she ate lunch with. If you had asked me to describe her, I probably would have said, "She wears a red backpack, I think," and left it at that. Looking back, I realized that while I barely registered her, she was watching me. Little things come back to me now. The way I would catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision at my locker and turn to see her walking away a little too quickly. The way she always seemed to be in the hallway when I came out of English, even though her class was supposed to be on another floor. At the time, I chalked it up to coincidence. High schools are small ecosystems. Paths cross constantly. I graduated, took a gap year to save money, then moved 2 hours away for college. New city, new roommates, new routines. I got a part-time job at a grocery store near campus. My world shifted. High school felt like something that had happened to a different person. Then, one night in my first semester, I got a friend request. The name on the screen made me frown. I recognized the face in the tiny circle, but only just. It was her, the red backpack girl, except now she was framed in that casual, carefully chosen way people use for social media. Angled slightly, soft lighting, half smile. We had never spoken once that I could remember. I stared at the request for a minute. We had a few mutual friends from my hometown, but nothing else. I figured maybe she was just adding everyone from our year for nostalgia. It felt harmless. I hit accept. Less than 30 seconds later, a message popped up. "Do you remember me?" I hesitated, then typed back. "From high school, right?" Her reply came fast. "Yeah. You used to walk past my locker every day with your headphones on, and you always parked in the same spot, by the far light post. I used to see you sitting in your car for a bit before coming in." That stopped me. Those were details I did not even think about myself. Things I had done on autopilot. I had no idea anyone had been paying that much attention. "Lol, you have a good memory," I wrote, trying to keep it light. She kept going. "You had math first period in grade 11, then history, then lunch, then chem, and you always wore that blue hoodie on Fridays. I loved that hoodie on you." A prickling sensation crept up the back of my neck. Still, I told myself, maybe she just had a crush back then. People notice weirdly specific things when they like someone. It was flattering in a way, even if it was also strange. She asked how I liked college. I answered in vague terms. She asked what residence I was in, which building, which floor. I dodged that one, saying only off-campus housing. She responded with a sad face and changed the subject. After a few more messages, I said I had homework and logged off. I figured that would be that. A weird little conversation, then nothing. Instead, the messages kept coming. Not constant. That would have been easier to block. They came every few days, then every week or so. Always starting casually. Hey, how are classes? How is work? Then slipping in details that made it clear she had been watching from a distance for a long time. You and your friend always sat at the back left table in the cafeteria at lunch. You cut your hair shorter in October of grade 12. It looked nice. You stopped driving for a while that winter. I worried something bad had happened. I tried to answer less and less, one-word replies, taking longer to respond, hoping she would get bored. She did not. Around Christmas, she sent a message that made my stomach drop. I walked past your house last week when I was visiting my aunt. Your mom still has that little snowman by the door. It is cute. I had never told her my address. Our town was small, but not that small. The idea of her walking past my house, noticing our decorations, made something in me lock up. I asked, "How did you know where I lived?" She answered with a laughing emoji. "You always left for school around 8:10. I just followed the first time." After that, it was easy. I stopped replying altogether after that. For a while, nothing happened. Her messages sat there, unread. Then, in February, I was closing up at work one night when my coworker glanced out the front window. "Your friend is here," he said. I followed his gaze. Outside, under the harsh parking lot light, leaned against a cart corral, was someone in a red coat, hair falling forward, staring through the glass. She was still for a beat too long, then straightened when she saw me and lifted a hand in a small wave. My chest tightened. "I will do the garbage," I told my coworker, even though it was not my turn. "Can you finish the tills?" He shrugged, already counting cash. I slipped through the back, heart pounding, and peered through the employee-only door into the alley. A minute later, I heard the front door chime, heard my coworker say, "Sorry, we are closed," in his bored retail voice. Heard the muffled sound of a female voice asking something. Then the door chimed again. "What did she want?" I asked when I came back out. He looked up. "Who?" "The girl in the red coat." "No one came in," he said. "You okay, man? You look like you saw a ghost." Maybe I did not see her come in. Maybe she changed her mind at the threshold. Or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. That is what I told myself all the way home on the bus, eyes glued to the dark window. When I unlocked the door to my apartment building, my phone buzzed. "Nice place," the message said. "The brick looks cozy." I was going to say hi, but you seemed busy. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "How do you know where I live?" I typed, hands trembling. "You mentioned the street name once in a story," she wrote back. "It was not hard. You should really close your curtains more, though. Someone could watch you." I blocked her then, finally. I blocked her on every platform I could think of. I told myself that was the end of it. A week later, my phone lit up with an unknown number. "Finn. It is me. You did not answer my messages, so I thought I would try this." I hung up without saying a word. Then I changed my number. It was a pain, but I felt like it was the only way to draw a line. Months passed. I finished the year. Got a new job at a different store across town. I moved apartments, choosing a building with a lobby camera and thicker curtains. Slowly, the feeling of being watched faded to a background hum. Then, one night the next fall, I was walking home from a late shift. It was one of those damp evenings where the pavement glows, reflecting the streetlights. My breath puffed in the air. The sidewalks were mostly empty. At the corner near my building, I stopped at the crosswalk waiting for the light. Across the street, under a flickering lamp, someone stood very still. Red coat, hair hanging forward. Head tilted slightly, like she was studying something in a display case. My pulse thudded in my ears. The crosswalk light turned white. I did not move. Her head lifted. Even from across the street, I could feel her eyes hit mine like a touch. We stayed like that for what felt like a full minute. Cars hissed past. My fingers dug into the straps of my backpack. Then she smiled. It was small, almost shy, but her eyes did not match it. I turned around and walked the long way home, 3 extra blocks, circling until I could come at my building from the opposite direction. When I finally made it up to my apartment, I went straight to the window and peered through a narrow gap in the curtain. The corner where she had stood was empty. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall and stayed there until sunrise. The next day, I went to campus counseling and spilled everything to a stranger in an office that smelled like tea and printer ink. Saying the timeline out loud made it sound even worse. The notes she must have taken on my routines, the way her attention had followed me from a town of 1,000 people to a city of hundreds of thousands, the fact that she had been able to stand outside my work and my home without anyone thinking she was out of place. The counselor did not laugh. She did not tell me I was overreacting. She walked me through my options, documenting everything, talking to campus security, even going to the police. People like this escalate sometimes, she said gently. You are allowed to take this seriously. So I did. I filed a report. I showed them the messages I had saved. They took a statement, logged the information, told me to call if I saw her again, suggested varying my routines. That was a year ago. I have not seen her since. Sometimes I wonder if finally putting it all on paper scared her off. Sometimes I wonder if she simply moved on to someone else quieter, someone who did not know how to name what was happening. I think about younger versions of me in that hallway, walking past lockers with my headphones on, completely unaware of the eyes tracking every step. In true crime shows, stalkers are often framed as big, dramatic villains, breaking into houses, slashing tires, leaving obvious threats. In real life, the horror can be much smaller and slower. A friend request, a casual message, a familiar shape across a street you have never mentioned visiting. People say, it is just online, or they are probably harmless, or they are just lonely. Maybe some of them are. But when someone collects your routines like souvenirs and carries them from one town to another, when they appear outside new jobs and new homes without being invited, harmless stops feeling like a word that fits. What stays with me is not her face in that window of my memory, or even the red coat under the streetlight. It is the realization that I went years without really seeing her, while she memorized my life down to the time I left for school. In small towns or big cities, that imbalance, the way one person can write you into their story without your consent, is its own kind of horror. Now, when I walk home at night, I still check my surroundings. I still vary my routes. And every time a new notification pops up from an unfamiliar name with too many mutuals from my past, I feel that old prickle at the back of my neck and think very carefully before I decide whether to let them in. I was 6 the first time my mother warned me about Mary, and I was 16 before anyone believed what she was capable of. I grew up in a tiny town in rural Saskatchewan where the church basement was basically our community center. Weddings, funerals, potlucks, youth nights, all of it happened under that low, flickering ceiling. Adults like to say church was the safest place in town. They said it so often, they started to believe it. That was exactly the sort of belief someone like Mary needed. She was everywhere. Short, solid gray hair, always twisted into a tight bun, glasses on a chain around her neck. She was not staff, not really, but she helped out with everything. Sunday school, summer vacation clubs, youth retreats, bake sales. Every event, she was there early, setting up chairs, making lists, telling people where to stand. The pastor trusted her. The parents praised her. And the kids tried to stay out of her way. Mary latched onto me the year I started kindergarten. She knew my name before I ever learned hers. I remember walking down the back hall of the church one day, bored and trailing my fingers along the painted cinder block, when a door to the supply closet opened and a hand reached out. "There you are," she said, like she had been looking for me. "You are a good little helper, are you not, Sienna? Come here a moment." Every inch of my skin told me to keep walking, but she already knew my name. In a small church, that meant she had talked to my mom, or my teacher, or both. My mother always said to listen to adults there, so I stepped closer. She crouched down, smiling too wide. "We are putting together a birthday list for the Sunday school children," she said. "What is your birthday?" My mom had drilled one rule into me: never tell strangers my birthday or where I lived, even at church. So I shook my head. "I cannot say," I mumbled. Her smile cooled. "Oh, come on now," she said. "I already know it is in April." It was not. My birthday is in October. I told her that. She frowned, hard lines cutting into her face. "Do not lie," she said quietly. "Lying is a sin, and I will have to tell your teachers you are a liar if you keep this up." Fear shot through me, sharper than anything. In that moment, the pastor, my mom, my teachers, everyone felt like they were on her side. I did the only thing I could think of. I backed away and ran down the hall to find my mother, babbling about the closet lady who wanted my birthday so she could tell everyone I was a liar. My mom marched back with me, ready to confront some stranger. The second she saw who it was, she stopped. "Oh, Mary," she said, relief flooding her voice. "Sienna, this is Mary. She helps with everything here." Mary laughed, that tight little sound adults make when they want to smooth something over. She got herself all worked up, she said. "I would never threaten a child. We were just talking about the birthday list." My mom looked between us, and I saw the doubt settle on me instead of her. After a minute, she apologized to Mary for the misunderstanding. Later, in the car, she told me I had a vivid imagination and to be kinder to people who gave their time to the church. That was the first time I learned how quickly a whole room could decide who to trust, and how easily one adult's word could outweigh a scared kid's. It did not stop there. A few months later, Mary approached me again, this time in the fellowship hall after service, where parents sipped coffee and kids ran circles around the snack table. "You like helping, do you not?" she asked. "You always listen so well. I have a special job for someone just like you." She told me about her retreat center out by the highway, 3 kilometers past town. They were having a conference soon, she said, and they were not allowed a lit sign overnight. Her solution was simple in her mind. Dress a child as an angel, put them by the driveway with a little switch, and have them turn a small light on and off when cars approached so guests could find the turnoff. "You would be such a pretty angel," she said, standing there by the road helping people find their way. "You want to help people find their way, do you not, Sienna?" In my 6-year-old brain, it sounded almost magical. Me in a white robe, being useful, being praised. I ran to my mom, breathless, and blurted out the opportunity. My mother's face went from confused to horrified in seconds. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." She hunted Mary down in the hall, voice shaking with anger. "You want to put my child outside, alone at night by the highway in October, in the cold, with no adults? Are you out of your mind?" Mary rolled her eyes, like my mom was being dramatic. "She would be fine," she said. "It is only a few hours. It is for the church." My mom went straight to the pastor. For once, someone listened. He shut the idea down immediately. After that, Mary's smile toward me lost any attempt at warmth. She did not scold me outright, but any time she passed, I felt a chill, like I had offended something that did not forget. She did not stop working with kids. In fact, she got more involved. By the time I was 10, my mother had to work extra shifts, so she signed me up for the church's summer program. "At least you will be inside and supervised," she said. The program was loosely organized chaos, Bible stories, crafts, a bit of schoolwork. Mary was main coordinator, which meant every decision went through her. She made the kids eat whatever she thought was funny. Spaghetti with melted gummy worms hidden inside, fruit cups that had clearly sat out too long. When some of us refused, she sneered that we could not take a joke. She insisted on outside playtime every day, regardless of the weather. That meant being shoved under a pop-up tent in cold rain, or lined up against the building in 35-degree heat. No shade, except the narrow strip of roof eaves. 3 kids collapsed from heat stroke one day, before the sheriff finally threatened to shut the whole program down if it happened again. The worst day came in the middle of that summer. My mom's car had broken down, so Mary offered to drive me and a couple of her nieces into town for the program. On the way, as we passed a pawn shop at the very edge of town, we saw a man outside with a rifle, pacing by the door. It did not look like hunting. It looked like he belonged to whatever bad feeling sat heavy in the air that morning. "Someone has a gun," I blurted. The other kids saw him too. We all started talking at once, panic rising. Mary's jaw clenched. "Enough," she snapped. "Do not start your stories." We pulled into the church driveway. She hustled us inside. I tried to find a phone to call my mother, but Mary blocked the office doorway with her body. "Your mom is busy," she said. "You're not bothering her with nonsense. You stay where you are told." That day, she changed the schedule so my age group was sent outside first and kept there the longest. The doors back into the building were locked. Any time we tried to tug them, they rattled, but would not open. We sat on plastic chairs under the weak shade of a tent, the field stretching out toward the highway. Nothing between us and that pawn shop but scrub and air. I kept imagining the man with the rifle deciding he needed a new car or a new hostage and walking straight up to the only obvious target, a fenced-in yard full of children with no way inside and one adult watching from a distance, refusing to let any of us near the phone. When my mom picked me up and heard I had been stopped from calling her, she was furious. But by then the danger had passed. The sheriff had gone to deal with whatever happened at the pawn shop. To everyone else, Mary's refusal looked like keeping order. Over the next few years, she kept finding ways to be alone with kids who did not know they had a choice. She organized a youth helpers team and always chose the same quiet, eager-to-please ones. She went on about obedience, about sacrifice, about how God loved children who did not complain. When I was 14, I finally told one of the younger pastors everything. The closet, the birthday threat, the angel scheme, the locked-out day with the man and the gun. He listened, brow furrowed, then sighed. "Mary has been here a long time," he said. "Sometimes older folks have strange ideas about discipline. Try to avoid her if she makes you uncomfortable. I will talk to the board about clearer policies." Nothing changed. Then, when I was 16, there was a car accident on the highway one icy weekend. A family from out of town slid into the ditch near the retreat center. They had 2 kids in the back. The crash itself was bad, but survivable. What made it worse was the delay. Later, we heard why there was a delay. Mary had been there that weekend helping with another event. She saw the wreck from the driveway. Another volunteer told her they should call 911. According to him, she said something like, "We are in the middle of a session. We cannot be running off every time there's a skid. They will be fine." He called anyway, in secret, on his own phone when she went back inside, but those lost minutes mattered. One of the children in the car died on the way to the hospital. That was the incident nobody could ignore. Parents who had shrugged off every complaint before suddenly remembered the times Mary had locked kids out in the cold to teach them a lesson, or refused to let homesick campers call their parents, or brushed off safety concerns as overreactions. The board launched a review. The sheriff, the same one who had threatened to shut down the summer program years before, came to a meeting and did not bother softening his words. "You were told this woman puts kids at risk," he said, more than once. "You all decided it was easier to trust her than to listen to them. Mary did not go to jail. She did not confess to some cinematic evil plan. She simply left, quietly, and started showing up at another church 3 towns over. People there did not know about the angel scheme, or the locked doors, or the closet threats. To them, she was just another tireless volunteer. When I visit home now, the church looks smaller. There are new faces up front, new posters about child safety policies on the walls. They put in cameras in the halls and windows in all the classroom doors. Parents sign permission forms for everything. It all looks safer, more professional. Sometimes at potlucks, old ladies still say they miss Mary's energy, how she got things done. They say the new volunteers are not as committed, that the kids are too soft now. I do not argue. I just glance at the corner where the supply closet used to be, and I think about how long one person managed to twist concern into control because everyone wanted to believe a church was automatically safe. People expect the worst dangers in small towns to come from outside. Strangers on highways, big city crime, accidents in the fields. The older I get, the more I think the scariest thing we ever faced was an ordinary woman with a ring of keys and a reputation for being helpful, who learned that in a place obsessed with trust and obedience, the easiest way to hurt kids was to make sure no one believed them when they said something felt wrong.